All right. So when Avi just a while ago contacted me and said, "Oh, can you do this?" I'm like, "All right." And then I get the topic, Buddhism in the West. I don't know, how do you translate Leon? Where's it going? Where are we? I don't know. I have no idea. And I mean, I know what I do, and I know sort of what my day is like, and some of the places I go to. But at first it was hard for me to think about, well, when we talk about West, what do we mean West? We're talking about the far West, like what's happening in California, or the near West, like in England, or this West? Is it Israeli Buddhism, or is it American Buddhism, or is it Buddhism in your own community or your own town? And when I started to look around and I saw so many different things going on, well, I just don't know how to talk about where are we going. So before I talk about what I do in my approach, and it does relate to me being the first one speaking. I'll just jump in with that. I'm the first one speaking. I didn't know I was going to be the first one speaking until I got here, and then suddenly they say, "You're starting." I'm like, all right. I thought if I'm late, I'll be the last, but no. Because I was driving in from Jerusalem, and the reason I was a little bit late is because I had all these conditions that came together to slow me down from getting here. I had all these different breakfasts I had to make for all these little people, and everybody wanted a different one. And then I had to get these little people dressed. And I heard someone once say that getting a young child dressed is like dressing an octopus, because the limbs go everywhere you don't want them to, and they get stuck in places. So I had to get like 3 octopi dressed, and get them to their frameworks. And the reason I'm telling you this, even though I know if you don't have children, it's really boring to hear about children, is because that's my practice. That's my Western practice, and I'll get back to that at the end. And before I want to talk about what I do, I want to get my watch so I don't go over time. I want to look around. I just want to share some of the things I notice that's happening in Western Buddhism in the West, to know not just like where we're going, but what's actually some of the things that are happening now. And there's a lot of change happening, and I've spent time in the East and in the West in Buddhist places, and they are very different. It's very different. And it's very different here than what I experienced in North America. So one of the ways that it's very common to express Buddhism here is it got a real psychological approach. You know, people are drawn to Buddhism in the West because of a seeming compatibility with psychology. And the way Buddhism is talked about and expressed and even taught in Dharma talks is a very psychological, using psychological language. And there are a whole bunch of Buddhist psychologists and Buddhist training for psychologists and things like that happening here. I know Itemmar's doing that, but a lot of them, a lot in the West too. And then, in relation also to what Abi probably will talk about, but a lot of the social emphasis that Buddhism has of taking it out of the monastery and into daily life. For instance, some of the monasteries I practice at in the West, they have prison programs going on, and they some of the teachers go and they teach meditation in prison. I don't know if that happens here, but it's very worthwhile, and it's a way of. But they're not teaching it so much as Buddhism, but as sort of anger management, you know, and dealing with past karma. So even that has a psychological approach, and it's kind of taking the Buddhism out of Buddhism and just emphasizing the practice. So I know there's been talk also, there are books written about secular Buddhism. And in a sense, to use the term Buddhism is sometimes to miss the point, because it's more often talked about in terms of mindfulness and stress reduction, things like that, and dealing with pain. And that's another area that is very popular, is actually with medicine. And there are people like John Kabat-Zinn who use mindfulness for chronic pain at the University of Massachusetts. So they have a whole program training doctors of how to deal with chronic pain that medicine doesn't help with mindfulness, and they found it really does work. So in addition to social programs like prisons, also there's a lot of Zen or Buddhist hospice programs, so dealing also with end-of-life journey. And there's actually a Zen hospice in San Francisco. So these are ways of making it applied to a lot of different areas that in the East was really unheard of. So when we talk about the West, we're talking about it becomes really quite complex. And also an emphasis in the West is we want proof. We do things only if we approve. So the scientific community has started to work with that. And people like Richard Davidson in University of Wisconsin, mapping, doing MRIs on the brain of long-term meditation practitioners and seeing, trying to prove that it works. And when people who are involved in meditation read that proof, they usually say, well, I knew that already. But the non-meditation world needs that proof. And, the Dharma supplies lots of long-term practitioners. That's how it started. One of the first ways they got into the West was through the university. And so it was like a Buddhist studies. But there's a sort of crossover that happens. And one of the themes in the West is that there's always a sort of a hybrid that's occurring. So you'll have Buddhist studies, but then you've got people like Raz who will do meditation. So if you want to learn meditation, take one of his classes in the university. He'll do meditation there. And in fact, my first experience of Buddhism was in an intro to Eastern thought back when I was in Montreal. And the teacher of that course was a Buddhist priest. I didn't know that at the time. Nobody knew that. I think they weren't supposed to tell anyone. And I went to his office one day, and I was kind of, pretty young. Didn't know anything about Buddhism or meditation or anything. And I just heard all these lectures. And I went to his office and I said to him, so what is enlightenment? And she was very kind. And he said, have you ever done meditation? I was like, I had never. But of course I said, oh yeah. So he invited me to his meditation room, which was the most painful experience I ever had. And it was it reinforced to me much later in my life. I understood that part of the emphasis in the West, and this is what he kind of taught me indirectly, was that it's practical. It's not theoretical. So a lot of these directions is like, how do we apply it? How do we apply this practice into prisons and into schools? And there are schools coming up, and there are schools that are teaching mindfulness for grade 1 and grade 2 kids. And there are these programs that are trying to get developed in certain school systems. I've even seen it in finance. There are investment companies that are run on Buddhist principles. So one of them is called Nirvana Investments. Now, again, these are just examples of how it can be applied. So I think that Western practicality is trying to take this and say, okay, well, then how do I apply it to business? And there are businesses like the San Francisco Zen Center opened a restaurant called Greens, and there's Greystone Bakery, and those are just a couple of examples of a lot of businesses that originally were trying to support the monasteries because they weren't going out and begging on the streets of San Francisco, but they needed an income. Still, they wanted to try to investigate, how do you take this into, the working world? And even in sports, there are these NBA teams that have mindfulness coaches. They actually come and they train the players in mindfulness in order to improve their performance. I mean, I won't get into someone like Tiger Woods, but it is there. Now, on the one hand, we can see that there's all this practical, practice-oriented thing, which is a move away from the monastery. So one of the great divides between East and West is that it's out of the monastery and into the street, into the marketplace, which is good, but it risks something, and the risk is happening all over the place, is that it becomes trivial. The practice is trivialized. And we see that also, is that a lot of these places are offering really surface. They're not getting into, the deep insight that Buddhist practice has to offer. It's more about like mindfulness-based stress reduction, to help your stress, but not to get to the real deep issues that I think Buddhist practice and Buddhist teaching is about. So that's the risk, and you get like Buddhist celebrities, and I saw a list for Buddhist celebrities, and the top 10. And you know who was number 5, not number 1, was the Dalai Lama. he was after Tina Turner. This is an example of the trivialization of Buddhism. That you have someone who is recognized world around as, a kind of enlightened being. And yet, he makes a celebrity list. So in the West, most people know him as a sort of Buddhist celebrity, which is, it's good, but it's also really tragic, because what it does is it emphasizes that this practice is marginal and trivial in many ways. It's being developed in the West. And the same thing with marketing. Like, I've seen books on Zen golf and, mindfulness anything. You find mindfulness anything. So it's kind of like the yoga of, and you can apply it to anything. And it takes a really deep, profound, and also difficult practice, and just really makes it shallow. That's one of the risks of taking it out of the monastery and into the marketplace. And we see that happening a lot. But, maybe that's the price we have to pay for making it more engaged and more active. And it's for serious practitioners like ourselves, just make it deeper in all those places, even in nirvana investments. So there's some of the themes that I see here is that, one, it's very practice-oriented. Another thing is it's decentralized. There's no, central Buddhist authority saying, giving a lecture, and this is, kosher Buddhism. It's anything goes, and anyone can do their thing, and there are groups everywhere, and there are lots of different groups, and there's a lot of variety. So even in this small country, there are many different groups and many traditions. And one of the that's good, and then there's also the disadvantage, is that there's a lot of disunity and a lack of cooperation and a lack of togetherness. And I remember there were some reactions against that, like I think Joseph Goldstein wrote this book a few years ago called One Dharma, and he did it specifically because he saw that all these groups were kind of at odds with each other, and they didn't know how to even have a joint retreat. They didn't know how to get together and sit. And so, we get so spread out that how do we make sense of it? How do we make it into this one Dharma, that we understand that it is a Dharma, and it may be the Dharma of, sports or pain management, but there's still a Dharma there. One of the other things I noticed, and this comes from my own teaching and having a group, is that the questions I get most often are based on relationships. That's what people seem to be really concerned about. And if they ask about work, they're asking about somebody at work. So it's really relationship-based. That's what people, I've noticed in the West, are really concerned about. Is how do I deal with others? mindfully? How do I bring compassion? How do I develop loving kindness, compassion, and in my relationships? So I've noticed that that's a big trend in the West. And a little bit about what I was doing a while ago and how I got more into the practice and how I made my choices to address octopuses in the morning was that I was in a monastery for a while in northeast Thailand. It was Wat Panadachat, and I noticed that there's this big kind of dichotomy. There were Thais there and Westerners, and the Westerners were so serious and unhappy, and the Thais kind of pranced around smiling. The monks, they were happy, and we were in the same environment. But there's something missing. What was missing among the Westerners? We were doing the same thing, doing the same practice, and there's something essential we were missing. And I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew that at some point, and not only that, but the Thais could eat one meal a day and keep strong and fit, and the Westerners turned into toothpicks and couldn't lift a bucket. So, again, there's something that we were missing, physically and sort of emotionally, in the practice, and I didn't understand what it was. And at that point, like in my little kuti, in my little hut, I realized I got to get married and have a family. That was my realization there. It was not like a deep enlightenment experience. It was just like, I need a relationship, and that's how I'm going to be selfless. And I wasn't going to be selfless in my hut all alone, because I'm selfless with the cockroaches, which was difficult. But and I wasn't with him. But that's what I realized then. So it brought me to sort of reclaim, you could say, my culture. And my culture is not one of monasticism and one of like long retreat, but it's one of more engagement, whether it's family or social action, things like that. And I had to sort of come back to that by getting out of it, going away from it. And then sort of try to explore how to practice there. And I think, one of the reasons I became much more drawn to Zen was that the ideal was, there's these 10 Oxford pictures, and they sort of map out the process of the journey of the spiritual path. And the last one is between this ox herding boy and an ox that he's herding. And the last one is called In the World, and it actually is like the boy in the marketplace. After he goes through the whole journey. The number 8, the 8th one on the path, is just an empty circle. And it's sort of the bull and self transcended. And for some traditions, that might be the ideal. Right? But in Zen, that wasn't the end. The end was then the number 10, which is in the world. And for me, being in the world was then coming back and seeing how I could develop love and kindness, compassion, and equanimity with these little octopuses I have. And that was really my what I decided was my path. And in some sense, it's having to deal with a non-dual approach. That you can be a serious practitioner, and you can be on retreat and be in a monastery, and it happens to be your home, and your sangha happens to be your family. So in a sense, instead of thinking that we're torn to make this decision, for many years I was torn, thinking, how can I make this decision? I feel drawn to both ways. I want to be on long retreat, and I want to be even in a monastery, and I want to have a family. So do I have to make that decision? And this sort of Zen non-dual approach is saying no. It's the problem is in the question, asking that question. I mean, maybe it's right here. Maybe you have both at the same time, and it's not it's non-dual. And I remember one time I also was struggling with the fact of being Jewish and being involved in Buddhist practice. same time when I was starting that meditation with that priest, and I actually had a Chinese girlfriend at the time, and I was sharing with her this dilemma. And she was Buddhist, but like ethnic Buddhist. So they just had an altar at home, and that's what they gave offering to. She didn't need to meditate. And I gave her this whole, struggle. She was just kind of looking at me and she said, "What's the problem?" She didn't understand the problem. And it's the same way that I looked at this choice of, family or being in the world and being in the monastery, and it seemed as a problem. And at some point, it's not that these, sides disappear, but they're no longer at odds. They're no longer separate. They're kind of in the same life. They're in the same world, and it's non-dual. So instead of solving the problem, you just take the problem out of it. Yeah. And then the two sides still exist, but they're not, opposed in any way. And I remember this one time when I first came to Israel, right near my house, Thich Nhat Hanh came and gave a talk in Jerusalem. And everyone was expecting him to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is in 1997. And he didn't. He talked about family and relationships and parents and children. And I didn't understand it myself. It took me a lot longer. I didn't have kids yet, and I didn't understand that. Oh, he's in Israel. Shouldn't he talk about the big issue? And someone actually asked him that. And he said that he was more interested in how individuals conduct their daily lives than in any big solutions. And I'm still trying to internalize that message. How do I conduct my life? So, Buddhism in the West, is it that we have all these choices and that some work and some don't work? Or is it just how an individual chooses and conducts his or her life? And the choice you make as an individual is Buddhism in the West, because that's just where you happen to be. It's whatever your practice is. And if we want to make a big idea out of it, if that helps, yeah. But perhaps the point is more, how do I conduct my own life? And I want to close reading something that I've been going back over some of my old books, and the classic from Suzuki Roshi of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. At the very end of it, he talks about Buddhism in the West, and I want to read a bit of what he said. He said, here in America, but we can say in Israel, we cannot define Zen Buddhists the way we do in Japan. American students are not priests, and yet not completely laymen. I understand it this way. That you are not priests is an easy matter, but that you are not exactly laymen is more difficult. I think you are special people and want some special practice. That is not exactly priest practice, and not exactly layman's practice. You are on your way to discovering some appropriate way of life. The main point is to practice seriously, and the important attitude is to understand that you have confidence in your big mind. We say big mind or Buddha mind or Zen mind, and these words mean something, but something we cannot and should not try to understand in terms of our experience. True mind is watching mind. Reality cannot be caught by thinking or feeling mind. Moment after moment, to watch your breathing, to watch your posture, is true nature. There's no secret beyond this point. We practice Zazen to express our true nature. And finally, which I think is sort of what I was trying to suggest, but he did it in a, I think, more direct fashion, that it's easy for us to say we're not in a monastery. It's hard for us to acknowledge that the practice here as a lay person is not also just a lay practice. It's not just a lay practice. So how do we find our way, and how do we find that special practice? So both he and Thich Nhat Hanh were saying that watching mind. And perhaps we shouldn't try to articulate it as much as to just practice it and conduct well. And one of the things that he goes on to say is we must not be attached to America or to Buddhism or even our practice. The beginner's mind, free from possessing anything, a mind that knows everything, is in flowing change. One thing after another cannot be grasped. So, perhaps even looking for the right practice is, trying to get that big idea and trying to grasp something, trying to have something we can hold on to, and maybe another flag or another identity, and say, okay, I belong to this sect, or I belong to this. This is my practice. And we miss the flow, we miss the change. We miss how this moment needs to be attended to, and not just the idea of, okay, my way. And there was someone asked me a question once during a retreat about how Buddhists should relate to non-Buddhists, meaning like everyone else around you. And especially family or friends or people like that who aren't involved in your practice at all. And he said, if you're not a Buddhist, you think that there are Buddhists and non-Buddhists. But if you're a Buddhist, you realize that everybody's a Buddhist, even the bugs. And I find that very helpful. Because maybe we should just forget about Buddhists and non-Buddhists and conduct ourselves well in this moment with that watchful, big mind. And then I think the practice is pure. So that's very much all I have to say for this moment. I thank you for listening.